participating in our town hall series. So to all of our elected officials, the chamber wants to thank all of you for taking time out of, we know your crazy busy schedules, but we do think it is important that you get an opportunity to talk with our member businesses that are the backbone of America's economy, and to hear from them directly about what is concerning them in these extraordinarily difficult times. We do have some questions that were pre-submitted that we'll be going through. Just for ground rules, first we'll hear from Senator Peters. If you want to just give a brief update of what's keeping you busy in the Senate and what are you looking at going toward the fall. And then we'll hear from Representative Stevens. And then I will facilitate the questions that were submitted in advance. If we still have time and if you have a question you'd like to ask, we're going to keep everyone on mute. And then we just ask you to raise your hand and we will unmute you and you can then ask your question. So we do have a lot of people on the call, so we want to try to keep some kind of structure to it. Before I introduce our two guest speakers though, I do want to acknowledge and introduce Tom DeLuzin. Tom is the Chief Executive Officer of Chief Financial Credit Union, which is the credit union is the presenting sponsor for our town hall series. So Tom, thanks again, welcome. And if there's somebody on the call who may not be familiar with Chief Financial Credit Union, if you want to give them a 2-minute talk on the credit union, please do so now.
Okay, well, I want to be respectful of everyone's time, but I do want to thank Senator Peters and Representative Stevens for joining us here today. I know you are very busy. So very grateful. I want to make sure I'm not muted. But actually, I'm going to introduce Cheryl Boudrum. She's our Vice President of Marketing. Ask her to say a few things today. So I will just hand the mic over to you, Cheryl.
Hi, everyone. Everyone hear me? I'm not talking on mute like I did at the beginning. Thank you. So just really quick, to be respectful of everyone's time. As you may have heard, if you were on the call earlier, I am joining from Toronto. My husband lives in Toronto. We have a condo here. And it was really going through my head how proud I am to be an American, and even more so how proud I am to be from Michigan. And I was thinking about why, and honestly, it's because I have no doubt that we're going to make it through this time because we are a scrappy bunch. There's so many times I say, don't worry, I got this, I'm from Michigan. And so I know people have often asked, you know, what's the difference between a bank? What's the difference between a credit union? What's the difference between financial institutions? Why do you guys do stuff like this? And I just wanted to go in, and I'm going to talk quick so I can get it all in. There's going to be a lot of emphasis, there already is, on the importance of voting, right? And we're already hearing it, vote, vote, vote. And I am 120% behind that. Yes, vote.
Someone has an alarm going off.
So I want to focus on the fact that there's more than just showing up to the polls that you can vote and you can have your voice heard. And that's where we spend and invest our money. For me personally, after all of this, I'm going to be very, very, very particular about where I spend my money. And a lot of my stuff is going to be going through small businesses that before I used to go to maybe big box stores. And you can do that with your financial institution too. I don't really believe in hard sells, but I believe that we are at a time where we need to start questioning, why do I have my account with you? What did you do during this time of crisis? Because frankly, this time was a time to shine or a time to show your true colors. We pivoted. Our normal vendor wouldn't let us do PPP loans. So Tom went out and found another one, and with days we were able to help. We helped organizations that weren't members already, that their banks turned down, that their regular financial institutions that they had been with for decades turned them away. We're hearing stories about the banks that helped businesses that didn't need it. Now they've had to give money back. It is time for us as Americans to call those businesses to the carpet and say, we don't support that by not having our accounts there or not purchasing from those businesses. Chief Financial, another thing we did is we paused 13,000 loans because we understand that normally our members don't have to make a call that says, I can't make this payment today or this month or in the next 3 months. I took the idea to Tom and said, let's pause them off for a month. He said, let's pause them off for 3. We went to our core processor. They said, we can't do anything like that. We rounded up 22 people and in 3 days manually paused 13,000 loans. On the 1st and 3rd at our Pontiac branches and Dearborn branches, we have members, we service an older community there. They can't line up outside, so we went to drive-through only. We have vice presidents, myself included, and our directors out there directing traffic, helping members in the parking lot, running things in and out of the building for them so we're not cross-contaminating. I am so proud of the organization we were and are in this crisis. I can't even put into words without it sounding like, oh, you're getting paid and your boss is on the line. But for real, you guys, this is going to be the time for us to stand up. Joe introduced the small businesses as the backbone of the United States economy. It needs to be treated, right? I don't know if there's any chiropractors on the line, but they'd say you got to take care of your backbone. So if you ask, another thing that we continue to do that I'm proud of is that, you know, this hurt us financially as well. We didn't pull our funds from the organizations that we support. We didn't go to Joe and say, hey, we didn't cut you that full check yet. We're going to need to not pay all of that. In fact, I think we're investing more. So please, 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 throughout this crisis, in every organization, not just your financial organization, let's really make our actions speak louder than our words, and make decisions based on how people were either able to step up or maybe show their not so great true colors throughout this. So with that, I'm so grateful to be here, and thank you.
Thank you so much, Cheryl. Okay, we are going to start out with Senator Gary Peters. Senator Peters is completing his first term in the U.S. Senate, but he is no stranger to the political theater. Prior to that, he spent 3 terms in the U.S. House. He was a state senator. He cut his teeth on politics as a member of the Rochester Hills City Council. And Gary, I want to remind you of one job you had. I believe when we talked about this, I was a journalist and the conversation was off the record, but I think we have gone past the statute of limitations now. So at one point, Gary was the lottery commissioner, and this was when the state of Michigan was first rolling out Keno in all the bars. And Gary told me one time, he said, yeah, he goes, now, you know, after dinner, I look at my wife and I say, well, I have to go to work, which means I just go and sit in bars for a few hours every night and see how Keno's working. So, Senator, welcome. We're really happy to have you. You're born and bred in Oakland County and still make Oakland County your home. So take it away.
Well, thank you, Joe, for a very unique introduction. I appreciate that. Although I'll say, I don't recall saying that several hours in the bar, but I did have to travel to a lot of bars, obviously, when rolling out Keno, which was it turned out to be a huge success and raised a lot of money for public schools, which is good. But I've worked with you for over a number of years in my city council days as well, and your work in journalism. It's great to see you doing such a great job here at the chamber, and thanks for having me here today. And Tom and Cheryl, thank you for your hosting this event and for the great work that the credit union does. And Cheryl, you're clearly very passionate, and I'm sure it had nothing to do with the fact your boss is on the air here with us. This is your passion is incredible. And that's why I'm such a big believer in credit union mission as well, and your members. And as you were talking about what your credit union is doing to help people get through this crisis, when I first got elected, the crisis into Congress was the financial crisis we were dealing with in 2008 and 2009. And I still tell the story, and why credit unions are so important is that if you recall, at that time, all the credit markets were frozen. It was difficult to get a loan. Our auto industry was literally teetering on the edge, which Haley was very involved in making sure that didn't happen. We worked together on that. But it was credit unions that stepped up and said, if you want an auto loan, we're giving auto loans out, which helped your members, but also helped the auto industry produce the metal that was necessary to get the economy going. So thank you for what you've done over the years. You've been a great asset to the community, and your heart's always in the right place. Well, I appreciate this opportunity to kind of give an update a little of some of the things that we're working on, then have an opportunity to answer your questions. It's great to have Haley Stevens on this. We are a partner, particularly on everything manufacturing, both of our passions to make sure that we continue to make things in this country. That's how we'll always be a great country as long as we make things, and that means focused on manufacturing. I'm going to mention that in a minute. But right now, my focus is all about getting us through this crisis, which is both a public health crisis and an economic crisis simultaneously. On the public health aspect and some of the supply issues, I serve in the Senate as the ranking member, the top Democrat on the Senate Homeland Security and Government Affairs Committee. And that means I oversee FEMA, which of course is the Federal Emergency Management Agency that oversees the federal response to the crisis that we're dealing with right now. And so it's been an intense few months, particularly intense right at the very beginning as we were scrambling to get the personal protection equipment necessary to make sure our healthcare providers had the protection that they needed to deal with the hotspot here in Southeast Michigan and in Detroit, to get testing supplies, which we still need to do more. So we've had a lot of issues related to the stockpile and our supply chain and how we create more resiliency with critical supplies, medical supplies, and drugs. And it's something I'm going to be continuing to work on in the months and hopefully years ahead as well. I actually put out a report from the Homeland Security Committee, from a minority report from my staff, talking about drug shortages and how at that time last year we were facing drug shortages because we are overly dependent on foreign sources for drugs, and particularly the precursors, kind of the basic chemicals that go into nearly every drug that we use. 80% of that comes from overseas, nearly all of it from China. And in that report, I mentioned the predicament that we were in, and when there is a pandemic, the United States is going to be put into a precarious situation. Little did we know the pandemic only happened a few months after that report, but clearly that is where we are now. We have to start taking back production with critical supplies. And it's not just drugs. If you think about just basic medical supplies like the swabs necessary to take the test. We only have one manufacturer in the country that makes swabs. And everybody in the world has been going to China where most of the swabs are made. And we have to compete with that, which makes it very difficult. And so we have to treat, in my mind, we have to treat these kinds of supply chains really like we do the supply chains for the Department of Defense. Now, I serve on the Armed Services Committee, and I deal with the industrial supply chain on a regular basis. And if you just put it in the same context, we do not buy U.S. Navy warships from China. We don't do that. We make sure we have shipyards in America that can build our warships. In fact, we've got a great shipyard right on the border with Wisconsin and Michigan, up in the Marinette Marine in the UP, that's building the Navy's littoral combat ship and future frigates. We make sure that's made in America. And we should be really proud here in Michigan, too, with the Army Systems, the former TARDAC, Ground Vehicle Support Center, which designs and builds our tanks and armored vehicles that are made in places like Michigan and Ohio and Indiana. We don't outsource that. And we've got to make sure that we have that ready supply should we go to war. So we should be thinking of medical supplies in the same way, that we cannot be dependent on anyone except ourselves when we face a crisis, and make sure that critical drugs and medical supplies are made in the United States. And we're working on a whole range of issues related to that. I'll just mention one other project that is a big one, and actually I'll be introducing it tomorrow. We're going to be doing some press on it. And that's, again, the focus on manufacturing and how we have to have a coordinated policy in this country to boost manufacturing generally, to drive businesses. And that drives all the businesses in Birmingham and everywhere else when you have a good core manufacturing sector. And when you look at how the U.S. government has been engaged in it, and it has not been in a coordinated fashion, and we're competing with countries that really focus on manufacturing to make a national effort to make sure that they are a powerhouse. Think South Korea, think Germany, think of some of these other countries that understand that that's how you drive an economy forward. And yet in our own federal government, the programs that we have to help manufacturers are scattered. In fact, we have 58 programs to help manufacturers, but they're spread out over 11 different government agencies. That makes no sense. There's redundancies. There's wasted taxpayer money in trying to coordinate all that. That we have to streamline that in a way that makes sense. I've been working quite a few months now with a number of folks, including the University of Michigan School of Business, has been extremely helpful in putting together a lot of our plans that we're doing, plus other academics, but then small businesses and manufacturers across the country as well. And what we're proposing is basically creating a National Institute of Manufacturing, really patterned on the National Institute of Health, which we have currently in the federal government that's focused on health. The National Institute of Health leverages what the private sector does extremely well, and then figures out where are there gaps and how those gaps can be filled through public efforts. The National Institute of Manufacturing is the same plan, and working to leverage our great manufacturers that we have in this country, but where are there gaps? And I'll just mention one gap before turning it over to Haley here, but is that clearly skills training is a gap. As I travel around the state, pre-COVID, we had a lot of jobs that were open, but folks just couldn't find the people with the specific skills needed to fill those jobs. And we have to make sure that we are providing those opportunities for folks in advanced skilled training. I just recently passed legislation that was just signed into law, for example, that will help veterans who are returning back from active duty to use GI benefits in ways that most folks don't usually think about. Usually you think of the GI Bill going to a 4-year college program or maybe 2-year, but the GI Bill can also be used to help folks go into apprenticeship programs and have the kind of skilled tradespeople that we need to have in this country. And now with the legislation that was passed that I authored and did on a bipartisan way, we're going to expand many-fold the opportunities that are going to be available to veterans here in Michigan to pursue that kind of training. But that's a place where government, the federal government, can work in close cooperation with industry to make sure that we have the workforce and the skills training necessary to propel our economy going forward. This has to be a group effort where we build on each other's strengths and also do it as efficiently as possible, which is why we want to streamline it into a national institute. It's not a duplication of bureaucracy, it's actually limiting bureaucracy, making sure more dollars actually go into helping small businesses, small manufacturers, and those workers who we desperately need to have the skills, for example. But it's certainly beyond that and goes into financing and all sorts of areas to leverage what our credit unions and other financial institutions are doing. But I think we need to have a comprehensive approach. So I look forward to working with the Chamber as we continue to work down that path. And all of you, your ideas as to how we really think about that. And of course, my added focus on manufacturing is because it just so happens, Michigan, we happen to do that really well. This is really great. To have a national focus on manufacturing is really good for the state of Michigan because we know how to make stuff and we know how to make really great stuff. And this will be great for the country, but also great for our local economy here. So again, thanks everybody for having me on. I look forward to your questions. Joe, great to see you again. And thanks again for all your leadership.
Thank you, Senator, and we look forward to hearing you in just a little bit. So next, I'd like to introduce U.S. Representative Haley Stevens. Like Gary, Haley is an Oakland County native, graduated from Seaholm High School, I believe, in Birmingham. So that's awesome. She is finishing her first term in office, and unlike Gary, who kind of came through maybe the more traditional political hierarchy, I believe, Congresswoman, this was your first actual attempt at elected office. Is that correct? So, but you're not a stranger to politics. I know that in the past, you worked on both the Obama and Clinton campaigns, spent some time out of state before moving back to Michigan, I believe in 2017. Is that correct, to run for Congress? So Congresswoman Stevens, welcome, and thanks for taking some time today.
Well, thank you so much, Joe, and Tom and Cheryl too, for today's sponsorship and your great words at the beginning. And truth be told, I wanted to see all of you, but I also just wanted to hear Gary's great update. I mean, I just love Gary Peters, and I love his focus, and he's someone I admire so much and am just so grateful for his leadership and efforts in the Senate. You can tell with his Institute for Manufacturing proposal that is a real strategic and long-term vision for this country that'll tie back to our bread and butter efforts. And you're spot on, Joe. I spent the 8 years when President Obama was in office, tied into his administration, obviously working on the auto rescue, as Gary mentioned, just had a front row seat to working with our automotive companies and our supply chain when they were staring bankruptcy in the face, particularly GM and Chrysler. It was a different type of crisis than the one that we are living through right now, but it was uncertain, and it was a lot of pain for our region. And then, helped to create the White House Office of Manufacturing Policy, came back to the field and helped to stand up a lot of R&D efforts. And interestingly, when I was getting ready to launch my run for Congress and taking a look at our special district, Michigan's 11th district, which has Troy and Birmingham and a little chunk of Bloomfield Hills, just Bloomfield Hills proper, Auburn Hills, Waterford, White Lake, Highland, Novi. We also have Clawson in there on the east side of Oakland County, Northville, Canton, Plymouth, Livonia, Milford, Wixom, and the like. I just looked and saw, holy smokes, not only is this the country's most robust collection of suppliers and manufacturing and headquartered operation for Chrysler, but these are all the companies I've been working with for the last like 8 years, you know, hand in hand and helping to regrow. And I'll tell you guys, to Cheryl's great point about our scrappiness, which is really a point of pride here in Michigan. The whole country is looking at us and they are telling our story. They are, you know, just absolutely so interested in how we have dealt with this pandemic, have stepped up to the industrial call to action. I know with my efforts in the House and you know, having a little bit of a platform, it was like the first thing we did, which was reorganize our website, directly tie into constituents, tell us your coronavirus impact stories. Do you want to make the PPE? We'll connect you to each other. You know, we'll tie in the state government. We created a 40-page, regularly updated document. This is on our congressional website, stevens.house.gov. 40-page resource document. We had the small business resource guide before we even passed the third tranche of coronavirus funds that created the payment protection program, as well as the, you know, plussed up money for the emergency injury disaster loan. So, you know, look, there's a reason why we were organized in this way. And in part, it's our story of, you know, we see it on, I think sometimes the t-shirts, you know, and we're the Metro Detroit region. Maybe there's a store that does this. They say Detroit hustles harder. And, you know, that's Metro Detroit for you. You know, that's what we do and it's also that we always rise, you know, that Metro Detroit, the Detroit region always rises, and we rise when times are steady, certainly with all this incredible making ability. I mentioned that we have, you know, communities like the one with our chamber where we have just rebounded time and time again. And you look at the engineers in Birmingham and in Bloomfield Hills, so many automotive executives, so many small business owners as well. And it's just an incredible concentration of talent, which not only makes us the envy of our you know, surrounding states and the country, but also for the world. I mean, there are times when I'm out shaking hands in the Starbucks and some of our coffee shops in downtown Birmingham, and I'm looking for somebody who is actually living in Michigan, because there's so many people in town doing business here and connecting with our different, you know, industrial corridors and the like. And obviously there are plenty of our own Birmingham residents that are always shopping in downtown Birmingham, but you know, a 10-year story for this region coming out of the financial crisis of 2008 to where we are today. And make no mistake about it, this pandemic is certainly a setback for us, but I sign up to what Cheryl said, which is that we are going to best expectations and we are absolutely going to be the success story, because truth be told, all the R&D, about 75% of the R&D in the autonomous vehicle space, in the direction where our auto industry is headed, is coming out of our region. We've got a burgeoning and very exciting aerospace sector as well, a lot of diversified suppliers that are tied in. When we look at supply chain disruptions, which is somewhat what we just lived through with the arrival of this pandemic and the need to kind of abruptly shut down and source the personal protective equipment. And we're proud of Ingrid. I know she's listening in as she's passing some of that out with your DDA today. look, that has been a real opportunity for us to source the talents of what some are calling the fourth industrial revolution, which is the use of ones and zeros or digital manufacturing applications. So I co-sign emphatically what our senator is doing with the Institute of Manufacturing for the United States, and am supplementing those efforts as best as we can in the House, particularly in my role on the House Science, Space, and Technology Committee with direct oversight of some of our other agencies that'll probably fold into that future institute once we get that bill signed into law, Senator.
Right.
We're rearing and ready to go for that. And I'll tell you guys, 2-year terms in the House, I signed up for 2 great committees. I just mentioned the Science, Space, and Technology Committee, as well as the Education and Labor Committee. And we've got in our state the largest concentration also and the most number of FIRST robotics teams. And so when we think about education in the age of COVID and some of the transformations that we've got to live through on this front, we've also got to embrace, I think, some of the best practices that all of you showcase at the Chamber every single day, which is community connections, the listening and engagement, bringing people into the fold, going easy on one another, and supporting the best in our community. And we all know that's in our schools. So we need to get those FIRST robotics teams back, just as we need to get our students back on the sports field, and we need to do so safely. And so I'm on that workplace safety subcommittee. I couldn't believe it, signed up for that one, and we're like front and center in this environment in terms of, again, providing the guidelines and, the all hands on deck, working with our corporate partners, our workforce partners as well, to get the best standards in place to promote the best safety that we can get in this environment. And that also ties into additional work that we're going to do around the coronavirus going forward. So still some going back and forth to Washington to deliver for our region, but you don't do any of this without having small businesses at the forefront and an all of community approach. I know we've got Annie Van Gelderen on the Zoom call today, and we're so proud of her leadership at the BBAC, and the arts and the creativity ties right into the manufacturing and the making of things. And that's why you see a lot of people who are, in our making sector, who are also artists themselves, and that's also another really unique part of our corridor, as well as just hard-nosed listening to the needs of small businesses, which is why I'm always so eager to listen to all of you and to hear your needs, as well as tie into, I think, some of these competitiveness efforts, particularly around making it in America, reshoring, the biopharmaceuticals pitch. This is, Joe, part of the work that I was doing before I was running for Congress with the National Network for Manufacturing Innovation, now known as Manufacturing USA. We've got the National Institute for Innovation in Manufacturing of Biopharmaceuticals. We were able to plus up some additional monies for those efforts in a public-private partnership way. I think we've got to look at efficiency in this environment where we're running budget cuts, and it always seems like it's got to be such a rush to spend. Well, if we're spending, we've got to spend effectively and in coordination with our community partners, as well as avoiding additional taxes onto our residents. And that's something that I'm taking a hard look at every single day when I'm in Washington, voting on behalf of this region and working to deliver for all of us. So there's a lot to say. I'll just say that I'm a believer in this region and everything that we're capable of, and just honored to be on the Zoom with all of you today. I wish we were in person, but this is also just a real treat to be able to wire in from my office here in Livonia to all of you.
Thank you very much, Congresswoman Stevens. Like I said at this onset, I do have some questions that were submitted previously that we'll start with. The first one is actually from Dan Genuine of Oakland Community College, who's on the call today. Dan was asking we continue to hear conversation about a fourth stimulus plan focused on state and local budgets being discussed in DC. What are the chances we see some type of federal legislation aimed at backfilling budget holes caused by the COVID-19 pandemic? And if we do see one, what does the size, scope, and timing of that look like? And Haley, we'll start with you because I believe the House has already passed phase 4. Is that correct, in the Senate to the Senate?
That's right. We passed the HEROES Act in mid-May, and it was a negotiating place for us to say, hey, here's how we're going to deal with some of the small business needs, the community funding needs. Some of the small business needs, as you guys know, have been addressed. Unanimous consent vote in the House and Senate signed into law for the Payment Protection Program extension. That's been a pretty solid program that was crafted in a moment of triage. But now we got to figure out to this great point, closing some of our budget gaps, particularly for our schools. And I'll say this, we see this a lot in Oakland County. I conducted a study looking at, particularly for our district, the dollars that flow through. And a lot of times, you guys, we just don't receive our fair share of federal dollars because they look at us and say, hey, you're prosperous. You've got healthy and humming budgets. I mean, here we are talking to the Birmingham Bloomfield Hills Chamber. I mean, these are two very well-run municipalities, obviously also a very well-run chamber. And so a lot of times we get overlooked and we just get the burden shoved down on us. And right now, you've got a shared impact on budgets because of the lack of consumer activity that impacted revenues. And when I look at this, and when I'm talking to even some of the colleagues that I have in Lansing, right? And I don't work in Lansing, but I consider anybody who's in an elected office a colleague because it's an all hands on deck approach. I do weekly calls with our mayors and township supervisors, get a lot of good intel from them on the needs of their municipalities. And we've got to look at this and say, guys, people pay their federal taxes, they pay their state taxes, and we've got to get them access to it. So I'll pass the ball over to Gary because I think that the House has done a pretty decent job of giving the Senate something to work with. We know how the game works. The House passes something, the Senate does their work on it, and then they send it back to us. So I don't always expect to get everything we want, but I think we've got a pretty great springboard for negotiations.
So, Senator, I guess I'll start with the information that we've been receiving from our friends at the U.S. Chamber that the HEROES Act was pretty much dead on arrival in the Senate. Would you share that philosophy? And if so, are you going to be able to craft a package to send back to the House that both parties can agree on?
Well, Joe, it's obviously that's the goal, that we have to do more. I think there's a broad consensus that we need to continue to deal with this crisis, and we should be acting sooner rather than later. We've certainly heard enough concern from economists, including also our chairman of the Federal Reserve, that says the longer you wait to provide additional resources for the economy, then you will have a bigger hole, and it'll be more difficult for us to get out. We certainly acted in a very strong fashion, as Haley mentioned, in a bipartisan way, unanimous. When you think about the Congress, to be able to pass 3 major pieces of legislation related to the COVID crisis and to have it pass unanimously is a big deal, as that passed out in the Senate. And so we are going to work. The House did do a package, and we did hear from the Republican leader, Mitch McConnell, who said that, I think you quoted the chamber, but it was the same comments that Leader McConnell put forward. But what we need to do is try to find some common ground and get it forward. So that's what we're going to be pushing in the Senate. From a time perspective, the Republican leader has said he'll start taking it up when we get back at the end of July. I hope that happens. We were hoping to act on it sooner, but we're back here in our home states this week and next, so it'll be just the last 2 weeks. But we're also finishing up in the Senate the National Defense Authorization, which sets out the authorization for the Department of Defense, which is always a must-pass bill, and that's right on our calendar right now. So that could push the COVID bill a little bit further. But I think there's no question in my mind, and Haley did a great job outlining just the impact to state, local governments, and to our community colleges and places of education generally. that we have a severe financial crunch as a result of massive unemployment, which we're seeing here in our state. We're at 21% of our workforce on unemployment. That's a massive number to be dealing with. And when you think of the drop in revenue, and yet our state and local governments still need to provide resources to our citizens and provide education, but that revenue drop, and there isn't the kind of flexibility that the federal government has in terms of being able to borrow money to get us through a crisis when you have a balanced budget amendment, for example, or a balanced budget requirement, part of the Constitution in Michigan, that makes the state not have the kind of flexibility. So I personally support and will be pushing for additional resources for state, local governments and our education system that need it. Certainly higher ed is being impacted in a major way in our community colleges. Dan, with your question, the services you provide, we can't have students that miss out on another year of quality education. They need to be able to stay on track. This is a generation that when you think about how they've been impacted, our high school seniors and our college freshmen, everybody in college now, just a huge impact to young people at a real formative time in their life, that we want to make sure that we get them on the right track, because it ends up paying big dividends over the years ahead. It's truly an investment. You get the dividends back as these folks are in the workforce and are able to get on their feet and be productive and have their lives going forward. So what that number will be, I can't tell you. It's in negotiations, but it'll be something less. Will likely get through the Senate than what the House passed. And then, as Haley mentioned, you go to a conference committee and you continue the negotiation process from there, and try to find somewhere in the middle again. But I just hope that we just step back and take a deep breath and don't get into hyper partisan politics like we do too often in Washington. I'm always about working together in a bipartisan way to find these solutions. I take great pride in that. And in fact, Joe, you mentioned the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. If I may just do a plug here, I was actually their Hamilton Jefferson Award for Bipartisanship from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. So
I saw that, yes. Yep.
So work in a bipartisan way to be able to get through this. But to get through to bipartisan, we need to give relief. We have to help state and local governments and places of education. One area that I'm also particularly focused on that we need, and it's certainly one thing this pandemic has done, is showed the real challenges we have in an economy in a very dramatic way. And one thing that I've always been pushing, and now we should all be on board, is that we have to make sure that everybody has access to high-speed broadband internet. You have to be connected. Here we are on the Zoom call. We're all connected. Everybody should have. In fact, if you don't, you're at a significant economic disadvantage without having high-speed broadband. When you talk about education, and as OCC and other schools go to online, I know they had a scramble to make sure their students had the devices necessary. And in Detroit, 9 out of 10 students don't have the devices or access to even get online. So if we can't bring people back to school in the fall and we go online, you're going to have a huge number of kids that are going to get further and further behind. That's simply unacceptable. We've got to make sure that folks have that access. And it's not just education and business. We know that one of the most transformative ways of delivering healthcare is through telemedicine, where people can have access to quality medicine from the comfort of their home. And in a pandemic, that's really a great thing, especially for the elderly and other folks who can be at home and have access to those kinds of healthcare. And then after a pandemic, still, it's about providing those resources to rural individuals as well that may have to travel. So we have to step up, and I hope that part of this package, we're making really a focus on long-term investments that we know have a large return back to the country. I come from an investment background. I spent 20 years in investment. Investing now in those areas where we know there are huge gaps that have been blown open by this pandemic will pay massive dividends back to the country going forward and allow us to have the kind of economy that we want in this country and we must have to continue to be a world leader.
Thank you. Kind of a related question going forward as to what kind of support the federal government is going to be giving people. We're hearing from a lot of our small business owners that the $600 weekly federal boost to insurance unemployment benefits turned out to be too good of a thing. And they're having a real difficult time trying to get their employees to come back, particularly in the restaurant and retail sectors, because they're making more money on unemployment than they would if they were working full-time in their old job. So I guess the question is, do you support extending the federal unemployment insurance benefit? And if so, for how long and how much? And either one of you can start.
Yeah, I'll jump in, Haley, if I could, because I worked a lot on the unemployment piece in the Senate. In fact, the part that expanded eligibility for unemployment to folks who are small business owners, people in the gig economy, independent contractors. Normally you can't get unemployment for that, but it's actually my legislation, the Pandemic Assistance Act, that was incorporated into CARES, and it's modeled after what we do after other natural disasters. I mentioned my work with FEMA. If a hurricane hits, we actually expand unemployment because we know people's jobs were literally blown away as a result of the hurricane. How do you get them to make sure that they're stable and can get back on their feet? And of course, in COVID now, we basically have a hurricane with the exception that it's blown across the entire country. It's not just one region, it was the whole country. So similar kind of effort to deal with that. And maybe in answering the question, Joe, first the $600, I get this question a lot, where did the $600 per week come from? The original intent when it came to how much to provide for individuals who had lost their job as a result of COVID, the idea was to replace their salary. Whatever they were getting, they could at least get the same salary going forward. But actually, what we heard from the administration, from the Treasury Department, and Secretary Mnuchin, he came back and said, because also our goal was to get money into people's pockets as quickly as possible. Because as you know, many people, if they miss a paycheck, they're in serious trouble. If they miss 2 paychecks, they're really in trouble. And so we had to get the money out as quickly as possible. And we heard back from the Department of Treasury that they were very concerned, given the fact that most states have very antiquated unemployment systems and computers, and we're seeing issues locally, we know, that if you had that kind of requirement, it would really delay potentially significantly any relief coming to families who are 1 paycheck away from being in serious trouble. And so the $600 was actually recommended by the Treasury Department as the median wage. So that was the compromise that was made going forward. So that goes through the end of July. We don't know where we're going to be, but in Michigan, if you look at us relative to other states at 21% unemployment, it's really kept this economy in Michigan afloat right now because you need to have people with money in their pockets so that they can pay rent. If you're a landlord, you want to make sure you're getting the rent money coming in. They've got to make their car payments. They've got to put food on the table. I mean, that's kept our economy going right now. And I've heard also from business owners in getting people back. And I would just encourage, this is a part of what we put into the unemployment bill as well. And in the strengthened programs, like we have in Michigan, a program which is incredibly important is WorkShare, which creates a great deal of flexibility for small business owners, particularly restaurant owners and others. And how WorkShare works, and to me, this is a great incentive for workers and great for businesses. As we reopen the economy, many businesses don't necessarily need folks at 40 hours a week back full time. And let me say, first off, if you're asking your employee that you laid off, if you offer them a job, they have to take that job. They have to come back, or they lose unemployment. So they have to come back. But if you want to hire additional people who you didn't have on unemployment, WorkShare is a great program because you can pay them. Let's say you need a worker for 20 hours a week. You pay them for your 20 hours a week, but under WorkShare, that employee still qualifies for unemployment, still gets the $600 per week. That's a really strong incentive. You can start a job, you can start working 20 hours now, you're getting into the workplace, but you pocket your 20 hours of work, plus you continue to get your unemployment. And that is true. Folks are going to be making more money than they would otherwise. But from a business perspective, it's a heck of a stimulus. Folks in that position will likely spend every penny that comes in for the basic necessities of life. And it's that kind of economic stimulus we're going to need to get us through this crisis and get our small businesses back up and running. So the WorkShare program is critically important, and I would encourage any member here of the chamber to take a look at that. The state has really worked to streamline a lot of the requirements, and you're seeing a lot of restaurant owners, for example, who, because they can only be at 50% capacity, don't have the same employment needs in terms of hours, but can bring people back, and they don't jeopardize their unemployment compensation plus get paid. Which is, to me, a great economic incentive. And it's also a way to start restarting the economy in a safe way. You know, that's we want to reopen and safe and make sure that people and customers also feel safe. But I think most business owners want to make sure customers have money in their pocket so they can buy their products, and that's part of it as well. It was a long answer. Sorry about that, Haley.
Well, I loved it.
Congresswoman Stevens, so
Yeah.
I want to set up your response a little bit. You know, if you go into any store or restaurant, retail operation, certainly in our area, every business has a help wanted sign. Everybody's desperate to find employees, and yet we've got 21% unemployment. So would you subscribe to the notion that perhaps the federal stimulus is contributing toward our artificially high unemployment rate?
I think we got to do some studies on that. I actually have been quite alarmed, and also just to be transparent, Gary has given me something else to aspire to with his Jefferson Hamilton Award. I got the I was one of 20 who got the Spirit of Enterprise Award from the Chamber for being bipartisan, and it's something I really look at with any bill I'm involved with, and anything I sign on to, and in particular, introduced quite successfully several amendments on our bigger packages that elevate the voice of small business and the needs of small business. When we were reauthorizing the Export-Import Bank, directed the bank to conduct specific outreach to our manufacturers and small businesses for purposes of their export interests, given that 98% of the world's consumer base is outside of the U.S. And that's what we do here in Michigan, is we make and sell things, and certainly navigating the tariffs. So let's just be clear, Joe. I am a believer in jobs, and we are, forget party for a minute, this is a nation of hardworking individuals. We are a state of hardworking individuals, and we have strong businesses because we employ talent. And if it's a service sector, agricultural sector, or the manufacturing services or manufacturing activities, that's what we do. And so I've had some real hangups as we've talked about additional phases of coronavirus packages, particularly with the notion of where's the jobs initiative, where's the jobs program. So, some efforts on infrastructure and New Deal type of activities, which, by the way, the New Deal was like 40% of our GDP. That was the spend to get us out of the Great Depression. And I don't know if it's where we are, but when you look at these things, and you're obviously not articulating this along party lines, but I think we're so quick to bring up partisanship, this is a Republican failing or a Democrat failing. And you can kind of look at this over the last 20 years, particularly with regard to the deficit and the debt. Who's responsible for these things, right? Is it a Democratic Party burden? Is it a Republican Party burden? And it's like, you look at it and it's like, no, it's just series of frankly, just ways in which we've conducted legislative activity. I don't know the answer to your question. I will say I've also talked to too many business owners who are saying, like, I can't call people back, or they're just saying they don't want to come back. And, they're citing the $600. I've talked to some business owners that have been able to call their employees back. You can look at some impacted segments of our economy, particularly on the services side. Fitness, we've got a lot of independent fitness studios in our district and frankly across the state that haven't been able to come back. And so now you've got furloughed employees. We in the 21st century have got to look at structural improvements, which is why when I got into office, made a series of phone calls and dedicated outreach to the other elected officials at the municipal level and at the state level, saying, hey, I don't care what party you are, right? We're in these roles, and we've got to be able to come together, not to pass the football around on our problems, but to really say, we've got to make structural improvements. We now live in a built environment. It's overly built, right? We've got the highway system, we've got the unemployment system. And, somewhat agog when one of the leading national economists who was briefing our House delegation on some of these challenges around stimulus or this or that, and said, yep, the unemployment system's the best we've got. Well, it's really not. And we know that. And it's not to point fingers at any leader or any individual, but it's around some of the structural improvements. And look, you can't plan for something like this. I mean, this has been quite an anomaly in the modern age, having to, hibernate, having to have our children. We all lived through 9/11 while our children were out of school for months on end. And there wasn't this uncertainty around going back to school. There's a lot of the planning and preparedness, and certainly the senator can expound on this with his work on the, Homeland Committee that he helps to run in the U.S. Senate. I mean, it was a nagging question that I had, but I think we've got to do better by our small business community and by our economy writ large. I will tell you all, and your leadership and voices on these topics is very helpful. And if the chamber wants to start the study just for our region, we'd be happy to help get you access to those economic development dollars to conduct such a study. But if you also want to weigh in with us, we've got to start doing things a little bit differently. And and it's not to say that, in these moments of triage or crisis, that's how we do it. But in terms of the longstanding investment that we need to make in our recovery process, as well as what it really means to feign the presence of consumer activity. At the same time, and
can I just pause you for 1 second? I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
I know that Senator Peters has to get on another call, so Gary, I wanted to thank you again for attending today. Thank you for all the work that you're doing. If anybody on the call has follow-up questions that they want to ask, Gary's office does a terrific job. I know James Jackson's on the line. Shoot a question to his office, either locally or in Washington, and they will be very timely in the reply. So Senator, stay safe on the campaign trail, and hopefully we'll see you soon.
Oh, thank you very much. Thanks, everybody. Sorry I got to jump off. Well, I'll leave you in good hands with Haley, but take care. Take care. Thank you.
Sorry about that, Congresswoman.
Just let me wrap this up quickly, because this is very important for everyone to hear, because I take these calls and you do not, which is I represent the most educated, wealthiest congressional district in this state, right? We've got a very prosperous economy. We've got a lot of business leadership. It's a real honor. When you are representing a district like mine, and you are taking phone calls in droves from individuals, young professionals, people who've never in their life had to go through unemployment, and who are staring off the cliff wondering, oh my gosh, what am I going to do, or this or that, or I wasn't expecting this and I was working in this segment of the economy. It's absolutely harrowing. And that's part of our reality here too, right? And this is why we have an unemployment system. It is why we have these safety nets, which is certainly not what your question is calling into play, which is, do we just get rid of unemployment altogether? But bipartisan action came from the president's treasury through a Republican-led Senate to a Democratic House, signed by a Republican president. I don't know where we're going to go with this. I do think we need to do jobs. I was pushing our House leadership on this. I have a lot of problems with doing otherwise, frankly. And, I think that's where we got to go. But we also have to understand, when you're at a 21% unemployment, and you got people who are from some of the best communities looking at evictions, who have been, having to move out, this and that. I mean, that's also a problem. So we've got to strike a middle ground here and not do a race to the bottom either way. And if we can conduct a study and if we can get the facts, I'm all about it, because this is a newfound environment. And that's like, yeah, you can't, if you can do things through the IRS or, tying people to their jobs and keeping them employed, which is what you can look up my op-ed in the Washington Post on this, wrote all about it. It's called the Paycheck Guarantee Act. Tying people to their jobs and not throwing them in this unemployment system. And I know this is so important to all of you, so I'll stop, but it's a major, major topic. And I don't think it's going to be over. I mean, the Fed is still projecting, a pretty high unemployment through the end of this year and into next year. And we haven't even accounted for the loss of new business development because people haven't been able to travel. How do you cut a business deal? I'll look at my friends from the credit union. How do you cut new deals if you can't do it in person, and you can't do the usual things? And I know you're dealing with that too, with, recruiting new businesses into downtown Birmingham with the DDA and all of your great leadership. So please, let's keep talking. I am data driven. I am fact driven, which is why I sort of gave you a non-answer to your hard-nosed question, because I don't have all the facts. I don't believe, though, that we should continue to try and feign consumer activity without just directly employing people and tying them to jobs.
Well,
So,
Congresswoman,
you
it's
have
always
it.
refreshing to hear a politician say, I don't have all the answers. So I laud you for that. We do have a few minutes left. We have Eric Wallace from Henry Ford Health System on the call. And Eric, you had submitted a question, but why don't you just go ahead and unmute yourself, and you can go ahead and ask the question directly.
Sure, no, I appreciate it. And admittedly, I apologize for a little bit of a healthcare specific question here. Obviously, Southeast Michigan was pretty well devastated. Our healthcare systems were hit extremely hard by our COVID response. And while we are extremely grateful for all of the resources and help that the federal government has given us thus far to help us kind of fill in the gap, right now we're still projecting at the Henry Ford healthcare system, a loss of somewhere between $700 and $900 million worth of revenue this year. And again, grateful for the advanced payments that CMS has forwarded to us. But I guess the question is, I know there's some effort, some discussion about changing those advanced payments into a forgivable loan or a forgivable grant to health systems. Do you see that moving forward anywhere? Actually, I just was looking at a story today that said Trinity Health is going to be laying off another 10% of their workforce, essentially. So any chance that you see that legislation moving forward to try to help, what is critical infrastructure, our healthcare systems, particularly here in Michigan?
Yeah, and we've got to look at what I'm starting to call the great forgiveness coming out of this pandemic. As the senator talked about, our graduating seniors and freshmen in going into the freshman year in college, and some of the things they're going to be dealing with. I mean, we've gotten forgiveness from the Secretary of State for those of you who had your license expire during the pandemic. You were able to still use that license and just have the temporary license paperwork available to you. Our taxes, tax day got moved to July 15th, by the way. Chamber, if you want to remind everybody about that, feel free. Where the Free Press had a nice write-up about in the business section around paying your taxes on the 15th. And then, for this healthcare segment, I feel pretty strongly about that, and I think we can strike a pretty good accord. I think that there's also some opportunities for reform. Trinity's located in my district, fairly close to their CEO, who I've been in regular contact with. I actually applaud them in terms of how they've handled some of this pain, and would like to see that forgiveness move into play. Does that get tied in? A lot of times you've seen, as we're doing the economic work legislatively, it gets tied in with the healthcare work. The two in this environment have been pretty inextricable. And guys, I'm going to tell you something. We cannot forget where we were before this thing hit, right? This, as I mentioned, this is a region that's been humming with activity. I mean, just true innovation, which is tied into the story of the post 9/11 era. Hello, we're the country that proliferated the internet, the gig economy, the iPhone, all these great things. We've got incredible healthcare systems here, incredible hospital systems. I mean, real leaders. I can't tell you how much I've personally leaned on the MHA on different things. So we don't want to fall backwards, by any stretch of the means, even though there has been some setbacks. And we also want to take this opportunity to really listen to the proven leaders. So I will tell you, Eric, brass tacks, I'm optimistic, but I think sometimes these things also come down to a coin toss. And I'll tell you, while I've been legislating in the age of social distancing, no one's in the room, right? There's no room. So you're making your way up to Washington to cast votes, and sometimes this stuff goes into a black box, and you're saying, wait, I hid my chips, and I thought we were going to get this. So we've got good leadership with our providers and our systems. Keep asking this question. And I also just want to make mention, you see the box of Sarah Roberts on this line. She is not only my legislative director, but the lead policy advisor for these issues. So let's make sure we're tagged up, because again, there's, you start weaving these things together. It's like the tapestry of legislation sometimes. And it's like, hey, there's been a lot of fear surrounding that, because it's like, oh, is that all we're going to get? And I'd rather tie it into the big kahuna rather than just, let it hang out on the outside and leave you guys hanging in the process.
Thank you. We are near the end of our time. Do you have time for one more question?
Yeah.
Congresswoman?
Oh, that's great.
So does anybody have a question that they would like to ask? Just kind of raise your hand and we will acknowledge you.
You can ask a question or make a point. Points are also welcome. It's that listening, learning, and leading in that order. And that's, my approach to doing my job with all of you.
Hearing none.
I'll ask a question.
Sure, go ahead, Pam.
Hi, Haley. For those of us who are trying our best to be in the gig economy, how do you see this moving forward when you talk about, and when Gary talked about the shared work, is that going to be part of that opportunity? I'm collecting unemployment. I hate it. I want to be working, but right now it's set up that if you make even a little bit of money, it just comes off the top of what you're making. And so it doesn't make any sense how this is set up.
Right. And look, it was a big improvement, and I really applaud and I agree with the senator's full explanation there. And I've heard from several. I mean, there were segments of our economy that have been impacted in this coronavirus, things that you just wouldn't even think of that aren't right in front of your face. We hear a lot about the restaurants, some of the transformations in the supply chain, the schools, and then you look at other, service sector jobs or people who host conferences or supplemental activities or consultants and people who've lost a lot. And Pam, this is really one of my big focuses in the Congress on the future of work. Future of work in the digital age is certainly applies to our capital intensive industries and as it also applies to sole proprietors and other individual workers. And, thanking the Chamber for bringing us all together, but also the Birmingham DDA and a lot of our other DDAs throughout our district that really made a lot of time with me to connect small business owners in our communities. And it was really, I called it a listening, action, and engagement tour. I wanted to hear from everyone. Two, we wanted to see what types of activities that we could drum up or learnings that we could pull forward that could lead to good legislation or more improved legislation. And then the engagement, which is this continual dialogue that we need to be having as a government, frankly. And so as we move forward into this, maybe coming out of the pandemic, or even as people are continuing to look at unemployment and trying to come back, the narratives of our gig economy workers and our sole proprietors are also just as important. And just because, someone is maybe getting something doesn't mean we're taking away from another segment of our economy. And so, Joe, as we kind of mentioned, maybe doing a study with your chamber, I spent a number of years working with and for the U.S. Economic Development Administration. And we can apply for a grant that would help us conduct that type of study that would bring in the voices of someone like Pam and our gig economy workers, along with your small businesses who really, we've got to get the facts. How many are saying, I've got workers, and it's astonishing, right? Workers who are saying, I don't want to come back. You all know, I have an amazing team in our office, right? And I just couldn't imagine someone who works in our office saying, I'm not coming back to work because I'm making more on unemployment. Oh, brother, geez Louise. And by the way, that's so short-sighted of you. What are you thinking? Because it's going to run out, and really, I think it's been sort of an uproar, guys. I don't know if that is going to be extended in such the same way. Now, Pam, does that mean your unemployment's going to go away? I don't think so. But does it mean that for some people who were, kind of in this middle of the road thing, we got even some students who are collecting big time, who were working part-time jobs. And, that was operating in a moment of true triage when we were looking at really exorbitant levels of unemployment. Let's get back to work. Let's get back to work safely, and let's come up with the best solutions that continue to bring out the best in our community. So I'm excited. I'm coming over, Joe. We're going to get to work.
Well, thank you, Congresswoman. And we would be very excited to partner with you on that study. So if you want to have Sarah follow up with me directly, and we'll take a look at what that might look like, that'd be outstanding, because any opportunity we have to provide our members with a voice to those who are making laws that affect them, we're always enthusiastic to do that. So,
Well, yeah, and then it's something we can point to. And it's
Sure.
coming out of, a great part of the country, one of the best cities in America, so, but it's something that we can point to. And guys, I'd say let's get in front of it. It's gonna come from local first. I mean, that's how we do the best policy making, in my
Sure.
opinion.
Absolutely. So with that, we've come to the end of our time. I want to thank Congresswoman Stevens so much for being with us today, and Sarah Roberts from her office. Also Senator Peters and James Jackson from his office. I want to thank our sponsors, Chief Financial Credit Union, Tom Delusion and Cheryl Bodrum, for all you do to support the local communities where you conduct your business. I want to thank all of our participants today, and just remind everybody that our entire town hall series has been recorded. So if you've missed one of our sessions and you want to hear what maybe your state rep or state senator had to say, your county executive, another, if you live in Congressman Levin's district instead of Congresswoman Stevens, they're all available on our website, as will this one be. So if you know somebody in your circles of influence who may benefit from the conversation of today, just direct them to our website. Again, that concludes our session today. I want to thank everybody for participating, and hopefully sooner than later, we'll see you all in person. Take care.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Haley.
This was great. Nice to see all of you. Keep up the great work.
Bye, everyone. Thank you so much.